Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And you may have noticed this week of shows is kind of a conversational set of show subjects, just sort of having chats with people. The one about with John Martin about his 40 years of study into Operation Anthropoid was really kind of cool. So that's what we're doing again today. Damien Lewis has something like a record of being the most appearances on World War II TV. Now it's either him or Ben Main, possibly John McManus is up there, and always draws the crowds. And his new book is about Josephine Baker. And the links to the book, as always, are in the description below. There's some links to some press articles. It's been serialized in the Daily Mail, other newspapers, Telegraph, various things, all in that information there below. Expand on that as usual. And of course, Damien's own website. And before I bring him in, I just want to say I'm not really certain how big Josephine Baker is around the world, because I live in France, where she's absolutely celebrated to a level of fame that is kind of impossible to compare to anybody else. If you were following the news last year, she's one of just 81 people since 1791 to be honored with a permanent place in the Pantheon in Paris. So huge recognition in Paris and in France. And when that happened back last year, she was being discussed on some very high-end news programs, chat shows. It was a big story. So I don't know where you are in the world watching this, if you're watching this in Australia, or perhaps you're watching it in UK or Netherlands, how much you know about Josephine Baker, but we will find out, because I'm going to bring Damien in now. So good evening, Damien. How are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. So
Good.
you heard me talk about, I mean, this lady in the country I live is absolutely, well, the most recognized and celebrated person you can possibly be. French American, black. She's known for sort of civil rights activism. She's known and just her talent as a singer and a dancer and an actress and a person who brings people together. That's how I see her, as someone who, this huge number of fat children she adopted, rainbow of children around the world. You've come from a world of writing some pretty serious, gritty kind of World War II studies and special ops and behind the lines things. What drew you to Josephine Baker's story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess what drew me more than anything else, and it's been a 10-year project researching it, was the very sense that you could have somebody who was so high profile, a true global superstar prior to the war, who at the same time carried out this incredibly daring and a secret role as a secret agent during the Second World War for the Allies, first for France, but then also for Britain and America. That kind of confounded me. How could someone with that instant recognizability, that incredible high profile, that superstar status also serve as a soldier of the shadows? So it was digging into that initial kind of conundrum, which really drew me in. And then I was lucky enough to, well, in fact, my father went first. So my father, like you do, Paul, lives in France. If you'll indulge me just briefly about him, he sold our family home, which was nothing grand, just a family cottage in Dorset, and with the proceeds bought a derelict 14th century chateau that had cattle living in it, and he spent the last 20 years renovating that. And because he is a fan of old buildings, as you can imagine, he paid a visit to the Chateau de Milandes in the Dordogne, which was Josephine Baker's kind of resistance and spying headquarters during the war. And so he contacted me after that visit and said, I have just had the most amazing experience, because I went there, expecting to see and visit this amazing chateau. And I actually ended up as well, in addition, having this incredible experience of Josephine Baker and her war years in particular, which I knew nothing about. And I said, well, Dad, it's strange you mentioned that, because that's a story I'm really interested in. I've been researching it for years. And so shortly thereafter, I traveled over and took my family there, and we went for a visit. And in particular, the French resistance room in Chateau de Milandes, which is the pièce de résistance, is really striking. It encapsulates her achievements during the war, and as you say, how she was so incredibly lauded and recognized for that.
And that's the thing, when someone has a life as extraordinary as hers, it's difficult to know which bit to kind of celebrate first, because they are all worthy of recognition. I mean, just simply if she'd done nothing else except record music and dance, that alone, given her background, would have been extraordinary. The wartime exploits clearly are extraordinary. And then the post-war achievements of moving things forward with the civil rights activism. So any one of those is enough for a movie or a book or a trilogy of books. And the one thing I was saying before we went live, folks, is that with all the coverage last year in France about her life, the aspect that seemed to get the least discussion was the wartime aspect, maybe because they wanted to keep the story separate of that, because France talks a lot about the war with regards Vichy and collaboration and Pétain and de Gaulle, and perhaps they felt that this story deserved its own place outside of that. But clearly with your work, it is about the war that intrigues you. And you as you said there, she was hiding in plain sight. It was more the James Bond style, because as we know with the James Bond movies, he goes around the world as a spy, yet everyone knows him in the hotels. Oh, Mr. Bond, come in here. And everyone, which of course the real world of spying, we've talked about it with yourself and others, is kind of underground, undercover, and quite grubby. And I mean that without sort of any negative connotation. Her life was one of kind of glamour and moving around, and she was doing all this stuff whilst also still entertaining the troops and appearing and doing stuff. So incredible life. But before we'll let you tell some of the stories, the next question I have is, with someone so written about, so discussed, so public, how do you separate legend from fact? Because I was saying realized today it's Christopher Lee's, or it would have been Christopher Lee's 100th birthday, I think, today. The incredible actor, opera singer, recorded a heavy metal album at 91 years old. And he had an extraordinary war too. But people have taken what his extraordinary war was and added all other layers to it that we now know aren't quite true. So with Josephine Baker, where you're starting with a blank canvas as a writer, but you've got all this stuff there. How do you separate the fact from the fiction?
Well, I guess, her war years are little known about and the least covered. So there is less, there are less layers of fiction to sort from the fact, because there is just so much less material. Why are her war years, less covered or less known about? In fact, just about everyone you speak to about Josephine Baker will say, yeah, I knew about her incredible role as a show person before the war, and a movie star and a singer, and of course her civil rights work afterwards, but I didn't know about the war years. That's what drew me into the story as well, of course, was this missing part of her life. But I guess one of the reasons why it is so unknown is because, in the French intelligence services, as in intelligence services of most developed nations, the expectation was that you would remain stumm. You would say nothing about your intelligence work for decades after you had served, probably until you passed away, or certainly for many decades afterwards. I mean, Colonel Remy, Gilbert Renault, who was the standout French resistance hero, as you know, he made a remark about it. He said, look, it's okay to write books, as I have done, about resistance work, guerrilla operations during the war, because they were not operations, which were so much ensconced in the shadows. But the real espionage work, the work of the secret intelligence services, that was and should remain secret and untold for a long, long time. So by the time Josephine sadly passed away, which was just about three decades after the end of the war, she had almost never spoken in detail about her war years. But I guess, Paul, the standout thing was, and this is again is what drew me in to this story, was if ever she was asked, and she was asked a lot, what is the most standout achievement of your life? People in the media or fellow dance partners, whoever would ask her, she would always pretty much invariably say, it's the war years. That was the watershed which changed her from being an incredibly dynamic and captivating star of stage, screen, and song, to being this serious, driven individual who found her mojo and knew what she wanted to do in the world. That fight she fought in the Second World War for freedom and justice against Nazi dominion, from the heart, from her soul, she never gave up after the war. That became part of what made her.
And do you think part of her motivation for doing this is that thing that you even see today, is when people move to a new country and become a part of that new country, they have this desire to show how loyal they are to that country and be more of a local than the locals, because she is from rural poverty USA. She's black. She's moving into Europe when there weren't many people of her background and language and everything else there, but she dives straight in. Josephine Baker, but as you've been pronouncing her name as Josephine Baker, she adopts that Frenchness immediately. And I suppose the ultimate way of stating your love for your new country is to serve them when they are at their lowest ebb, and that is France in World War II, a country that had gone from being the place in Europe and the world everybody wanted to travel to. Music wise, the jazz center of the world, the vibrancy, the racial breaking down of barriers, and that incredible energy that was coming out of the area there, and then the dark years of the war. So is that where her motivation comes from, just to kind of prove how French she was?
It's even more than that. So that's absolutely part of it. But bear in mind, she traveled to France at the age of 19, and she was invited over by an impresario, a theatre organizer, to star in La Revue Negre, the first big show she did in Europe, which took Europe by storm, incidentally. But she left America with trepidation. This was a huge step for a 19-year-old young woman, but she did so because she honestly believed she could never really make it in America because of segregation, because she believed that her career there was being stymied. And so when she arrived in France, and in fact toured across Europe and came to the UK and came to Germany and Austria and the Netherlands and was embraced by the peoples of Europe, and she felt this freedom from prejudice that she'd never experienced before. So imagine it, Paul. Imagine it. She leaves the States, where she has been subjected to terrible prejudice. Okay, she arrives in Europe and she feels liberated and accepted, and she's becomes this amazingly sought after star, and she feels free, and she feels she can be herself. And then suddenly, the Nazi threat starts emanating from Berlin, and the drums of war start beating, and she realizes very early that if what the Nazi credo, if it triumphs, if it succeeds in doing what Hitler set out to do, Hitler and his cronies, which was to conquer the free world and spread the credo of Nazism around the free world, where would there then be that she could flee to? Where in the world could she and people like her, or anybody who believes simply in democracy and freedom, where could they flee to and be safe? So in a sense, yes, she did what she did for France because she wanted to prove she was a true Frenchwoman, but also she did it because there was no choice. Stand and fight or the world would fall.
I mean, that's amazingly well put there. And we have to accept the fact that some of the most famous, I'm going to use the word spies, but double agents, whatever, were actually in it because of money or wanting to get something out of it. I'm thinking of those 6 that were working in England for the Germans that, that Ben McIntyre wrote about. They're not unsavory characters, but their motivations aren't quite as pure and honest as just wanting to defeat Nazism. There's always an element of trying to get some better themselves, get some wealth, get some recognition, get to the right party. Well, Josephine has that already. She already has the ability to, in Europe, to walk into whichever party she wants to and get the invitation. So she doesn't need that. I'm assuming she doesn't really need any financial assistance. But what she does want to do is just, as you say there, just fight against something that she must have recognized the evil of it very, very, very quickly. Whereas other people in Europe are maybe adopting a bit more of a, well, let's wait and see attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So how did she go? There's the resistance movements don't put adverts in newspapers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Saying wanted agents. She's in a very vibrant and colorful showbiz world, which is traditionally people moving about and transitory kind of people. How did she set about this journey of becoming a spy or becoming an agent, however you want to classify her?
Yeah. So, I mean, even before the war, bear in mind, she had been identified by senior figures in the Nazi regime as being an enemy of Nazism. They published pamphlets with her on the cover, and she was degenerate and all the things that Nazism stood against. So she knew what was coming. She knew that the evil that was going to emanate from Berlin, and she very early on sensed that France was going to fall, could not survive. And so what happened before the war was that the French intelligence services, in particular the Deuxième Bureau, which was the counterintelligence service, was woefully underfunded. Very few agents. The Abwehr, the German foreign intelligence service, was flooding France with agents and hoovering up French sources for intelligence and doing it very blatantly, almost as if to provoke Paris. And because the Deuxième Bureau was so underfunded and because it had so few agents to fight back, they realized that the only thing they could really do was fall back on the policy of recruiting what they called honorable correspondents. So these are freelance, unpaid freelance spies, basically those who volunteer for whatever reason, largely patriotism, to spy on behalf of France, to gather intelligence on behalf of France, and who happen to be working in or living in a walk of life where you can usefully gather intelligence. So that's moving in those kind of circles or traveling to those kind of places. Well, of course, Josephine had both those things. She moved at the very highest levels of embassies and governments and high society. But not only that, she had the ability to travel anywhere in the world with the perfect excuse. I'm on a tour. I'm going to perform in Lisbon or London or Budapest, wherever it might be. And these are my tour trunks and this is my tour entourage. What's not to like? So she had this perfect cover. But when the Deuxième Bureau, so Colonel Pellol was the head of the German desk, Paul Pellol, who's a real standout hero of the story, and when he directed his deputy Jacques Abte, another standout hero of the story, when he directed Abte to go and sound Josephine out at her Paris home, Le Vessinette, Le Beauchesne, when he directed her to go and do that, Abte had his reservations, and so did Pellol. You know, they say, you know, we were worried she was one of those showbiz personalities who would shatter like glass at the first hint of danger. That's exactly what they thought. And so Abte travels out to her to her home on the outskirts of Paris, expecting to be received by a glamorous superstar in a ball gown and jewels and the archetype Josephine. And when he arrives, there's a voice from the garden, and she emerges dressed in a pair of gardening trousers and a battered felt cap with a tin of snails in her hands. And she's actually been out gathering snails in the grounds to feed to her ducks. And he sees just a glimpse of the other Josephine. And this is the down to earth, get my feet dirty, get my hands dirty. I'm a soldier like the rest of you when I need to be. And she takes him into the chateau, and very quickly, as they sit around the fire and they talk, he perceives of something else. And this is something that I'm very grateful to one of Josephine's last dance partners, a guy called Jean-Pierre Reggiori, who is still with us and still very vibrant, who spoke to me a lot about his experience of being on stage with her and being her friend. And he said, you have to understand about Josephine. Why was she such an amazing performer? It was because she had this unique, incredible ability to reach out from the stage and to make a personal connection with her audience, to make every man or woman in her show believe that she was singing for him or for her. Wow. And as Abte sits there and talks to her and sounds her out, doesn't actually say, will you be a spy, but is trying to, you know, feel her out, he realizes he feels that connection. He feels the fact that she has this amazing power to reach out and touch. And he thinks, my God, she would be a world-beating spy if only I can bring her on side. And so then, of course, he says, you know, look, I'm here for a reason, as you probably guessed. And, you know, we're trying to recruit honorable correspondents. Would you, would you be willing to consider? Now, bear in mind, she is also surprised by him. She was expecting an Inspector Clouseau kind of figure to turn up, and actually, Abte is, you know, he's from Alsace. He's blonde, good-looking, fit. He speaks lots of languages. He's erudite. He's cultured, and she is rather intrigued by him. And it's at that moment, you know, he asks her, and she says, Paris has given me all I have, and I'm willing to give France my life. And so she pledges to, you know, to give her all for the cause. You know, of course, you know, words are cheap. So there was no guaranteeing that she could deliver, or indeed that she had what it takes, or that they could entrust her with the kind of things they had in mind. But very quickly, very, very quickly, even on those first missions she was given, she starts to show to Abte and to Pellol and others in the French intelligence service and the British intelligence service as well, bear in mind, because Commander Dunderdale is there. He's part of this process, that she has the capacity to be a world-beating spy.
And I'm glad you mentioned Dunderdale there, because Biffy Dunderdale sounds to me like someone from a Jeeves and Wooster. No, he sounds like a character someone has made up in the 1930s. And we have some of the figures from British intelligence we do know about, and he's sort of a medium level of fame. Some people have heard of him, some haven't. But these kind of people that we now revere within SOE and perhaps OSS in America, they had an ability to spot talent, just like Josephine's early career. She'd been spotted for having a talent on the stage and with her voice. It's the same kind of process, but from a different type of world, that are recognizing talent there, because I'm assuming that there were lots of people who tried spying who were useless at it, and they're the ones no one writes books about, because they just realize, no, this person's just terrible, like all the failed actors out there who give up after a couple of years. So tell us a little about Biffy Dunderdale, because the name alone is extraordinary, because he's central to this story as well.
Yeah, so Dunderdale is an amazing you could not make Dunderdale up, and he's so little known about and deserves to be so much more known about. So Dunderdale, I just try and give you an example. So to this day, in the training facility for the Secret Intelligence Service, so for new agents, in the mess, on the large, huge polished dining table, there is a silver bowl, and the silver bowl is engraved with Dunderdale's name and kind of his honours in the Secret Intelligence Service. He's this iconic figure within British intelligence. He is the agent where seasoned operatives turn around to the newcomers and say, "You should aspire to be like Dunderdale." Why was that the case? Well, Dunderdale first became an agent in his 20s and carried out the most extraordinary missions actually in Russia to start off with. We don't have time to go into them, but put it this way: he was sent in dressed in his school uniform, because he was brought up in Odessa and schooled in that part of the world due to family connections. He sent in his school uniform, posing as a schoolboy, to find out the fate of a fleet of mini submarines that the Americans sold to the Russians, and now Russia is about to fall. We need to find out what's actually happened to them. That's his first mission, and eventually they find them, and there's a great deal of amazing skullduggery involved. And from there, Dunderdale reasonably quickly, he's recruited into the Secret Intelligence Service. What else are you going to do with a guy like this? And he's sent to France to be the Secret Intelligence Service's spy master in France. Now, incidentally, he got his nickname Biffy, so he's Commander Wilfred Biffy Dunderdale, and he got it because he was such a dab hand at boxing. So he's actually a tough figure. Okay, he's erudite, he's very dapper, dresses fantastically well, but he's actually tough underneath it all. And Dunderdale in Paris makes common cause with and befriends and builds this incredibly close intelligence partnership with the French intelligence service, and in particular the Deuxième Bureau. So Colonel Pelol, Jacques Abte, and Josephine, these people become his cohorts, and they are his cohorts in trying to combat what they know is coming. And what they know is coming is not just the rise of Nazism and the declaration of war and all the rest of it, but they absolutely know that France will fall. They have no doubt about that whatsoever. And because they know France will fall, they know that the French intelligence service will need a survival plan, a means to continue espionage after the nation has fallen, a means to re-establish contact with London and with the Secret Intelligence Service after the forces of Nazi Germany have seized the country. And so Josephine is written into those plans from before the outbreak of the war, because she has the ability to travel across borders. She has the ability to travel across borders laden down with these tour trunks full of her musical score sheets and all her costumes. And in those, you can argue, as long as she's good enough, as long as she can pull it off, can be secreted the intelligence that the French intelligence service, after the fall of France, will want to get to Britain to re-establish that intelligence pipeline.
And again, we're saying it again, but languages, traveling around the world, a reason to be out even just late at night because shows finishing, rehearsal times, going down jazz clubs, kind of traditionally down dark alleys, the less salubrious part of cities, things like that. I mean, it's the ingredients are amazing, the qualities that she can bring to this of just, as you said, we said right at the beginning, hiding in plain sight by just going through places, and this ability you mentioned there, and I'm really pleased you said that, to just make people, the connection she has with audiences is that ability to connect with people as well, because people, I was doing a tour last week in Normandy with a grandson of a Ritchie boy, some other German Jews who were interrogating German prisons in Normandy. And it's all about trust. It's all about building a rapport with the person that you're actually treating as a victim, because you are pumping them for information. You're getting this stuff there. And that's all based on trust, isn't it? It's the old good cop, bad cop routine if we get nicked in our lives. And so if she can do that on stage, when you're with a distance between a person, when you're actually in a room with a person and she can bat her eyelids and talk, I mean, it's that these skills, you're either born with that or you're not. Yeah,
and not only that, Paul, but she had a chameleon-like side to her. She had to be a survivor. She'd fought all her life. Let's be frank about it. She was brought up in poverty in St. Louis, or as I think as the Americans say it, St. Louis. And she had struggled and fought all her life. She'd gone to school barefoot. She'd jumped onto rail cars and stolen coal, with her street gang to try and keep the house warm. She'd worked as a servant in affluent houses and got beaten, and she'd had a tough time of it. She'd run away from home when she was in her teens to try and make it on the stage. She was a survivor. She was a street fighter. She was tough as nails. Now, of course, as the Nazi blitzkrieg steamrollers into France, in spring 1940, she could have done what most Americans did. She could have gone to the American embassy in Paris, said, "Give me my papers," got on the first steamship to America and fled to safety. She could have absolutely done that. And being Josephine Baker, of course, she'd been in front of the queue because she was so high profile. She chose to do otherwise. She didn't choose to do otherwise because she knew she had the talent to be a world-beating spy. She chose to do otherwise because she was driven by the sense of what she had to do, what was right. And one of the really standout things about her story, one of the things that makes you start researching, you think this has to be told, and it's because of who says it. So those people who are her handlers, her spy masters, Pelol, Abte, Dunderdale, key figures in the story, all of them at some stage, most of them repeatedly say, she was our inspiration. Because at a certain moment during the war, during our darkest hours, during June and July and August and September 1940, where everything was going wrong, where defeat looked certain, she never once gave up. She never once even allowed anyone to suggest we might fail. She always said, from the word go, America will join the war, and when America joins the war, we will win it. And before then, we just have to hold out. So she became the muse and the inspiration for the professionals, for the spy masters. That's one of the most incredible turnaround elements of the story. And not only that, as the war progresses, she goes from being the rookie agent to being the spy master herself. So eventually, not long into the war, a year into the war, 18 months into the war, she's running solo intelligence missions on her own, all around the world, gathering intelligence, engaged in spycraft, running that intelligence to the Secret Intelligence Service in London on her own, because she's the only one of them who can still travel, who still has got enough cover and enough clout and enough prestige to get through these borders.
And thank you for that. And perhaps just expand a little bit on what kind of things she's doing, because I wonder if people watching this are thinking, is it just a question of going to parties and listening to some sort of what senior people are saying, and perhaps the ambassador's reception and going there? Because it's a lot more wide ranging than that. She's going into the real kind of daring do kind of stuff as well. I mean, I've done shows in the past, Aline Griffith out in Spain and what have you, which was very much just a socialite spy and was still significant to somewhere. But she's out there doing real. She's connecting all the areas of the resistance activities, spying. So give us a kind of example of some of the things she gets up to.
So she does do the embassies. I mean, one of the first missions she set by the Deuxième Bureau, by Abte and Pelol is, and this is before the actual outbreak of, or before the German invasion, long before the German invasion. They say to her, "Look, we need to know what the Italians are going to do. Are they going to join the Axis? Are they going to set a pact with Hitler? We don't know. We need to know." So she's got a brilliant in with the Italian embassy, and she finds that information out within a week. Absolute cast iron. This is what's going to happen. So she does do that schmoozing at embassies with high-ranking enemy military commanders and all the rest of it. But to give you just one example of the kind of hard-nosed, edgy, death-defying intelligence mission she undertakes. So in September and October 1940, she sets out with Jacques Abte, to travel to Lisbon. And the reason that they're heading to Lisbon is because in Lisbon, there was, and probably still is, I would imagine, at the British Embassy, a cell of the Secret Intelligence Service. Why were they going there? Well, they were going there at the behest of Paul Pelol. Now, bear in mind, Paul Pelol has moved into Vichy France now, and he is ostensibly now running an intelligence service for the Vichy French government, so in partnership with the invaders, the Nazi invaders. But secretly, of course, Pelol, standout hero of the story, is actually running a shadow intelligence network gathering world-beating intelligence for the Allies. So all of the intelligence gathered by the French intelligence service since the fall of France, so we're talking June 1940 through to October 1940, is stuffed into Josephine's tour trunks. And bear in mind, some of it is written in secret ink on her musical score sheet. So that's less discoverable immediately, but some of it, the raw intelligence, the photographs of the invasion craft that the Germans were going to use for Operation Sea Lion, for example, some of that is raw photographs and raw documentation. And in there is, for example, a list of the German agents dispatched to the UK, lists of Luftwaffe air bases flying missions in the Battle of Britain and in the Blitz, lists of French agents, key French agents that they can try and look at, that CIS can try and reactivate, details of the German plan to use Ireland as a backdoor to invade Britain, so recruiting the IRA into German for German ends, and details of the German plans to seize Gibraltar. There's a gold mine of intelligence in there, and somehow Pelol has to get that to London. And they have, I mean, I don't know if this will blow your mind, but it blew my mind. So when France fell, the fall was so fast, so precipitate, that everybody was blindsided, which meant that the Secret Intelligence Service, Britain, had no agents left in France. None. They had no contact. They had no rate. It was just, Churchill said to Dunderdale and his intelligence chiefs, "What are you going to do to get us back into France?" Well, Josephine got on a train in Pau Station, so the French side of the Spanish border, with Jacques Abte posing as her tour manager under a false name, right? Posing as if they were going on a on a tour of Lisbon, and she had arranged to do some shows in Lisbon. Perfect cover, yeah. The posters were up in Lisbon. Josephine Baker is coming, as she travels across the French-Spanish border into Spain. They catch a flight from Spain into Lisbon, and every border that they cross, they are risking those trunks being opened and immediately them being arrested as spies. At which stage, Josephine Baker is not just a spy; she is a black female American, and she's already been identified as an enemy of the Nazi state. And bad things are going to happen, as they would to Jacques Abte. So, they get to Lisbon, they deliver that material to the British Embassy, to the Secret Intelligence Service. It's spirited to Britain, back to London aboard a BOAC flight, because there were direct flights, if you remember. And the telegram that comes back from Dunderdale is, "We are delighted." But not only that, Dunderdale then says, "Josephine, we need you to go back into France to build this new intelligence pipeline that we've reestablished here. This is the connection, and we need to make it real." And so that's just the start of any number of these real cloak and dagger operations. And bear in mind, her cloak and her dagger was her celebrity, was her notoriety, was her stardom. That's what she used as her disguise. She had no disguise. She was always herself, but always something different.
Wow. So we've understood that she's got this ability to charm people, to make people feel important. But, you've already mentioned Lisbon, and everybody watching this knows that Lisbon is the kind of one of the main centers of double agents and triple crossing and you're meeting people all the time who are not who they're saying they are, who might be double bluffing, triple bluffing you, working for someone else, pretending this. So she's got to have an ability to understand people as well. People are feeling a connection to her, but she's got to go through Europe with a means of separating herself, who the people she's talking to who are genuine. Because, you know, you said yourself, France is going through a very tricky period in 4041 when the kind of the sides are sort of are becoming determined and people are becoming pushed back. And so, you know, by 44 and the other periods you write about, things are a little bit more organized. The resistance has become a thing. There is a central organization for it. And we know now who the goodies are and the baddies are. But 4041, some of the people who would later identify as a goodie or bad haven't really decided themselves where they sit. So
Absolutely.
where does her intelligence come from? Is it just another kind of, you know, born with gift to understand people? Does she have to learn these skills?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So, you know, Paris falls and Josephine, you know, moves to her Chateau de Milandes in the Dordogne, and she gathers around her a kind of hodgepodge of Jewish refugees, disaffected intelligence agents, and former soldiers from the French military, and they're hungering to do something to resist. No one knows how. And then de Gaulle gives his June speech from London, calling on the French people to rise up and resist. And the 2 points about that: one, they listen to it in the radio, on the radio in the chateau, and they are absolutely electrified. And then very shortly thereafter, they listen to Churchill's speech, very similar, and they're doubly electrified. They've finally heard people who have the guts and the vision and the belief that we can stand and fight, that all is not lost, that England, France's alliance to England is not a marriage with a corpse, which is what Pétain declared, of course, when Churchill asked him to stand firm. So they are electrified, and they reach out to find a means to resist. And to give you an idea of how unusual and unique that was at that time, summer 1940. So the first real predatory encounter Josephine has, which is at the chateau, is when a colonel of the Armistice Commission, which was, you know, peopled by the Gestapo and the SS and other unsavory characters, turned up at her chateau, and she had been denounced. And they believed that there were weapons in the chateau and she was running a resistance cell, and they were there to search it and arrest her. And she weathers the storm magnificently with such icy cool calm and bravado that she eventually convinces the colonel that he's barking up the wrong tree. But she had been denounced because word had got around that she was running a resistance cell and trying to build links with the intelligence service in London. That's how rare that level of willingness to stand up and fight was in France at the time. You know, it was a very, very rare thing. And so you're absolutely right. She had to have a brilliant radar for those people who were good uns and those people who were not, because any number of people out there were obviously out to entrap, sell you out to the enemy, and feather their own nest in doing so. But she was, you know, she was absolutely resolute, and she just had this sixth sense. I'll give you an example. So prior to the war, during the Phoney War, in fact, she performed to the troops on the front line, in particular to the French and British troops, and in particular she made a big thing of singing songs that she knew the British troops loved. You know, If I Were the Only Girl in the World, Tipperary, those kind of things, because she realized British troops were far away from home and they were preparing to defend a country which was not theirs. And so she performed on the front line time after time after time. It was a double act. It was herself and Maurice Chevalier. Maurice Chevalier was the very famous French showbiz and film star prior to the war. The two biggest stars of France you could imagine. She and Chevalier never got on. She never liked him from the start. There was always this antipathy. And lo and behold, once France fell, and bear in mind, Josephine said, I will never perform again in France until the last Nazis left the country, until we are no longer under occupation. But very quickly, Chevalier was not only gracing the stage in Paris, but he was actually giving broadcasts and singing songs on Radio Paris, which was a voice for basically the Nazi regime, the occupiers. And so she had this ability to know in her heart whether somebody was coming from the side of right or not. And I think it was that sixth sense, that instinct, that steered her through.
Wow, and we could do a separate show about Maurice Chevalier because, as you hinted at, he chooses a different route essentially in kind of acceptance, and I'm not going to use the word collaboration, but certainly doesn't do much to stand against the regime, and yet he is, ironically, he is the born in France. He is the actual born, because Josephine's only become French by marriage in 1937.
That's right. Yeah.
So she's dual citizenship at this point there. So that's fascinating. And I suppose also that the showbiz industry in her youth would have been lots of crooks and bad people in that. So I suppose she'd learned to recognize the goodies and the baddies from the showbiz. Not that I'm necessarily equating the sharks of the showbiz world to the sharks of the German Third Reich, because it's a different kind of world. But it's still the ability to recognize good and bad is inherent in that. And you said, she's on the list from the Germans right from the get-go. So they don't need much of an excuse to pick her up on something. They could, appearing in the wrong place, having a crowd that's too many. There's all sorts of trumped up things they could bring an entertainer in on. Not in failure to enforce blackout at a gig or something. They could trump up anything and get rid if they wanted to. So it comes back to this whole idea of the fact that she's openly moving through as the celebrity that she is and hoping that will keep her going. But she goes beyond France. It's North Africa as well. So, she's not just in one domain. She moves around. It's, as we said at the beginning, it's an incredible story. If you made it up, people would think you've made this up. It's too many things happen in one person's life. But, again, folks, obviously the main stories and the expanded stories are all in the book, which is available, to order or to buy, depending on where you are right now. But any other kind of classic stories that typify her resilience and her abilities in that period?
Yeah. So after she's carried out the Lisbon mission, she's asked, and let's be clear at one thing. She is asked. She said from the get-go, from the very word go, I will never be paid for any of this work. I will never accept a penny for any of the work I do for France or the Allies. And not only that, she exhausted much of her pre-war wealth, and she was a very wealthy woman before the war, on funding her espionage work and her work supporting the troops. So not only did she not accept a penny for what she did, she actually funded a lot of it herself. But after the Lisbon mission, she's sent back into France, and she heads to Marseille. She links back up with Colonel Paylol. And Paylol says, you must stage something here. You must sing in France. You must get back on the stage and perform, because if you don't, if you keep up this principled facade of I will never perform again if there are Nazis in France, they're going to come for you because it's too obvious. You've got to perform as part of your cover. And so she decides to put on La Créole, which is an opera, but it's a comic opera. Really fitting for the time. And it's winter 1940-41. And so within 2 weeks, she relearns, she performed it before many years ago. She relearns the words and the score. She gathers together a cast. They find the theatre to perform in. They get all the costumes together, and she puts on this world-beating performance of La Créole. And just as she's getting to the end of it, she meets Paylol, and Paylol says, you have to cut your show run short. He said, because the Gestapo are coming for you. You need to leave on the next available ship, which sails from Marseille Harbour to North Africa, because otherwise I can't guarantee that they will not seize you. And so Josephine has to cancel the last 2 or 3 shows, and before heading to North Africa, in the most incredibly inspired, brilliant piece of spycraft, but it isn't spycraft, but it is. She gets one of her former Deuxième Bureau agents to go back to Chateau de Milandes, because of course she was a massive lover of animals. She had these exotic animals that formed part of her act, to bring all of her exotic menagerie to Marseille. So when she boards that steamboat to sail to North Africa, not only is it Josephine Baker with her tour trunks, but she has, Bozo the Great Dane. She has her monkeys. She has her white mice. She has this crazy exotic menagerie of animals as an extra layer of cover to see her through. And of course, she has Pelol's most recent intelligence dossier hidden in her trunks. That is kind of like, that epitomizes what made her so special. Whenever the enemy upped the ante, whenever they got closer, whenever they were closer on her tail, she pulled something else out of the hat to say, no, I am Josephine Baker, the performer, and you will not manage to bring me down.
It's the phrase from Essex. She brasses it out. Like Michael Caine and Sean Connery in The Man Who Would Be King. Just brass it out, Danny. Just when things get bad, just go up a level. Go up a level of just bigness, and don't go down and try and scurry away discreetly. Just go bold. Go down kind of with bands playing to the station, to the port, and get on that boat with your menagerie, with your trunks, and just from there as an incredible story. And yet the other aspect of it, and we don't need to dwell on this very much, is that during the war years and just after, there's all sorts of health issues as well. She's a marriage failures, there's miscarriages, there's sepsis she gets at various points. So because she's not, some of these agents we talk about in the SOE, they're in their early 20s. She's she's in her late 30s now.
Late 30s,
So she's doing all this stuff, but she's having these personal tragedies at the same time. So that adds another layer of complexity and just personal endurance to this as well. So anything about that you think was affecting her war effort, or helping her, or motivating her more, or what was going on there?
Yeah, so she was plagued by ill health increasingly throughout the war, and a large part of that was just the stress and the tension. I mean, these back-to-back solo intelligence operations, it's impossible to imagine the level of stress and the impact that would have on you. And so eventually she ends up getting really, really sick, really ill when she's in Casablanca. She gets sepsis and various other complications. She is battling death repeatedly, no doubt about it. And so she's taken to a private clinic in Casablanca called the Comte Clinic, run by Dr. Comte, who volunteers his services, never charges her a penny, to nurse her back to health. And she's there for a long time. However, this gives you the measure of her and Jacques Apte, her partner in intelligence. Very quickly, they decide that they can make hay whilst the sun shines. They can make something good out of this adversity. They realize that the Comte Clinic is the perfect spying hub. It's a dead letter drop. Apte can turn up there with a dossier of sensitive intelligence, leave it. One of the American intelligence agents they're now working with can call in, pick it up, and he's just visiting Josephine Baker. So what would look more natural? She's an ailing American superstar. In fact, anyone can visit. Anyone's got a reason to want to visit Josephine Baker and to see she's okay. Anybody of any nationality, because she's a global star. And not only that, she in that clinic, because it's an inviolable space, the Gestapo are hardly going to come and raid a private medical clinic in Casablanca, in which is ensconced a star of her stature who's fighting death. That's beyond the possibilities. And so they realize very quickly they can hold all of the meetings they need to have with their various sources and agents and high up individuals in Morocco and across North Africa, and no one will be able to spy upon them, and no one will be able to intervene. So she becomes the kind of spy queen, the spy master, orchestrating all from her sickbed. And she does that for many months, and very successfully. So even when she's at her lowest ebb and fighting death, she will not give up. And that in fact, one of the titles I played with for the book was Undaunted, or Unbreakable, because at every stage, when you think she's finished, when you think she's down and out, when you think, well, this can't go on, she finds another level of strength to draw upon to fight the fight that she knew had to be won. And let's go back to that point. That's what drove her. Nothing else. She did not have to be there. Not for one moment did she have to be there. She did not have to be risking her life and putting her health at risk and exhausting her financial resources to fight this fight of the shadows. She did it because she knew it was the right thing to do. And that's pretty damn special.
It is. I mean, she's got an exit policy at any one time.
Any moment.
And she can just call up some former colleague and say, I need some money, get me out. And the Allies someone would spring a submarine from somewhere, or a Lysander or something, and she could be pretty much safe and secure within hours of making that request. and other people in the resistance perhaps don't have that. So the fact she's not choosing that, the fact she's never going that, is just a remarkable testament to just what this spirit, and there's all this discussion. I'm changing the subject a little bit. There's all discussion right now about who the next James Bond is going to be, and even Dunderdale himself is one of those people that suggest it's the background of James Bond, as in Christopher Lee has suggested. But when people say about a James Bond can't be female, I think that the model is already there, isn't it? I mean, she is the archetypal in plain sight glamorous spy, and she's black. She's a black female as well. Mm-hmm. So extraordinary. So going back to kind of the writing process again, I mean, I'm assuming this book could have ended up being a trilogy of 3. I mean, you're having to kind of sift out some of the less dramatic stories just to make it readable. I mean, I assume it was an easy book to write in the regards that there's no low spots in the middle. You go, there's no middle act kind of thing.
Look, it's a thick book. Can people see that? How do I do that? Yeah, it's a thick book. It's thick, so it there's an awful lot in there, and an awful lot had to be left out. But sifting the truth from the wheat from the chaff. Let's put it that way. Lots of different versions of Josephine's story have been written, and you hinted at this earlier. People write stories about the war in France from different agendas.
Yeah,
because there was collaboration. Brother was fighting brother, wife was fighting husband. They were betraying each other. Thank God Britain was never invaded. I think if Britain had been invaded, we'd have suffered in the same way. And so, absolutely. Even to this day, I spend a lot of my time in France. You can walk into a village and that neighbor doesn't speak to that neighbor because one was collaborationist and one was, fought for the resistance. It still rankles and it still, cuts deep. And so people tell different stories for different reasons. I'll just give you one example of that and how it manifests itself in this story. So when Josephine and Jacques went to Lisbon, and they took the dossier of intelligence with them that I've described to you, and they handed it over to the Secret Intelligence Service, they said, we want to go to London to meet de Gaulle, because de Gaulle is the person who had inspired them in June 1940 to take the path of resistance. And the message that came through from Dunderdale, in London was, we need you back in France. We need you back in France to continue this flow of intelligence. We need to ensure that keeps flowing. That we need more of this material. This is war-winning material. But they gave the guarantee, and Dunderdale gave this guarantee. He said, look, you will be agents of Free France. So you'll be working for de Gaulle, but we just need to dispatch you back into France to carry on this process. And so they believe him and they return. Well, in truth, of course, Dunderdale had told nothing to de Gaulle. De Gaulle's intelligence service did not know anything about Jacques Abté and Josephine Baker's work for the Allies, this incredible work they did for the Allies, until 1943. And when they found out, by that time, Jacques Abté and Josephine were in North Africa. They were like, well, who is this Jacques Abté person? We'd never heard of him. What's he doing working with Josephine Baker? What's his role? Who are they spying for? They wrote to Dunderdale, and they wrote to the Secret Intelligence Service, said, what is going on? At which stage, London had to say, well, I think we just made a mistake and forgot to tell you. But it was deliberate. They deliberately didn't allow them to become agents for de Gaulle, and they had their reasons. So, there are layers and layers and layers of intrigue and secrecy and agendas that we're even playing out through the war. And that's what makes it a kind of this labyrinthine game that's being played all the way through the book. Is those conflicting agendas. It gives it edge. It gives it real cloak and dagger shadow drama. But it also must have been very hard for those involved, because, you think of it from their perspective, you think of from Jacques Abté and Josephine Baker's perspective, they believed that they were serving as agents for France all the way from summer 1940 through to, the end of 1943. In fact, they were agents of the Secret Intelligence Service and who had not told Free France.
And this is a good point to mention that it's not a biography in that sense, is it? It is way more than that. You know, your experience with your other works is you do build these layers up. You know, you do bring in the heroes that's perhaps other times are left out of books. When you were on talking about Bruneval, you gave us that layer of the French aspect of it that perhaps the para histories don't bother to dive into. And the Abte and people like that and Dunderdale are just as important to the story.
Just as important.
She's the magnet, she's the hub of the wheel, but she needs this system around her, people that recognize the ability there. And you've
absolutely
got that to build those layers and keep all those plates spinning, because as you said, it can get very complicated and murky when you start again that 41 42 period. You're reading a book and you go, who was that again, which department does it work for? And then the department changes name again. You go, so who was that, which organization? So they were communists, now they're not. It's very, very complicated. And you know, we're coming back to the discussion we've had before about the more access to archive, because you know, you say in the beginning of the book, you know, all the archival use you did in access you had in Paris and elsewhere, because you're not going to get this story just from Q, you're not going to get it just from France, and you're going to have to build up these sources there.
Yeah, I mean, without the French government, huge credit where credit's due, releasing, you know, secret intelligence service files from the Second World War on Jacques Abte and Josephine Baker and other key characters in the book. Without that, couldn't really have written it, and they deserve enormous credit for that, because that's a rare thing. And you're absolutely right. You know, it is peopled by an extraordinary cast. You know, I'll just give you one example. A character that I actually I think is fantastic. I love this character. You know, Hans Mussig, the German Hitler Youth diehard, who sees the error of his ways before the outbreak of the war, steals all the money from his local Hitler Youth bank account, flees to London, becomes a banker in London, then flees to France when he's discovered in London, and is recruited into the French intelligence service, and eventually ends up being interrogated by Jacques Abte as part of his recruitment process, and then helps them, becomes an informal honorary correspondent, you could almost describe it, with Josephine and Jack on that mission to take the intelligence dossier to Lisbon to get it into the hands of the Secret Intelligence Service. So there are all these characters that step into and out of the frame who are the supporting cast to the central hero, which is Josephine. But without them, you know, she could not have achieved anything like she did during the war. So they are a team. It's a band of brothers. But you know, nearly everybody that surrounds her is a man. It's a very male-orientated environment, the world of secret intelligence in Second World War. So she has this supporting cast who are colourful, amazing, fantastic figures, and you know, together they are stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing we've discussed, yourself and I and other people, is how do you measure the success of commando operations or the underground activities? Because some of the even the very celebrated resistance cells or spies, you look at it now objectively and go, did that I mean, Operation Mincemeat is back in the news again now, you know, and you know, did that save thousands of lives? Probably not. Was it an incredibly inventive scheme? Yes. But I think with what we know already, her work absolutely is getting information to the right places, that is building intelligence that can be used, that is absolutely helping with the war effort. I mean, you know, we're not the kind of people that say this is going to be the thing that absolutely wins the war. It's a tool in the toolbox for the Allies, but we can definitely look at this and go, she contributed, and she contributed where in a way that actually is telling, you know, and that must have been particularly rewarding for you to realize that not only is it an incredible story, it has that importance at the end.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, you know, when she moves to North Africa, she becomes a key, you know, intelligence source for the Americans who are planning Operation Torch, you know, the landings in North Africa, the springboard for Europe. And the key American intelligence guy who is their contact, their handler in Casablanca, one of the 12 apostles, they were called, Roosevelt's kind of secret spies. When he's recalled to America just before the Torch landings, he comes to see Josephine and Jacques Abte in the Comte clinic. She's, you know, running her sickbed intelligence cell, and he says to her, America will never forget what you've done for her. That's how important their mission was just in the Torch landing. So yeah, there are these beats throughout the story where you understand, you know, what Pelol says about the intelligence dossier they take to London, what Dunderdale says about it. You understand this material ended up on Churchill's desk. And Churchill may not have known the source. He would not have known the source because they were never, the sources were they were categorized as to their reliability, but not named. But he would have known it came from a solid A source. This was war-changing material. So yeah, I mean, that's without a shadow of a doubt true. And each one of those moments is special because it means that the risks she was taking were rewarded. They were worth it. And I guess that's what kept her going. That's what kept her undaunted and unbreakable, was the knowledge that this was making a difference.
No, definitely. And we had a question earlier, and about whether or not, when the USA comes into the war, that in any way changes her thinking, because you said at the beginning there, it's part of her motivation is to make the world realize what's happening in Europe, and the US, and she could have again at that point say, okay, I've still got an American passport, perhaps I could go and do something over there. She could have done something just valuable, even in just bringing black people into the American services. She'd have been ideal for that kind of work in Europe. But she's firmly, she by now, she's French in her heart, isn't she? That's a contrived statement, but she absolutely is, isn't she? I mean,
look, just one example of that. So in North Africa, so once the torch landings happen, the top American and British commanders say to Josephine, look, will you act as an ambassador for the Allied cause, because we need to draw together now the Moroccans, the other North Africans, the former Vichy French, the Free French, American forces, British forces. We all need to fight against the Nazi threat, and you're the only person who can do that. So she agrees to do that, and then the Americans approach her and say, "Will you sign a contract for the rest of the war to be a performer, to put on shows, to raise the morale of the American armed forces? So will you tour North Africa and then follow us into Europe?" And she says, no. She says, I will perform for whoever I want to perform for, as long as they are soldiers fighting in the Allied cause against the Nazis. So I will not just perform for American troops. And moreover, I won't get paid. And so, of course, she does perform for American troops all over the shop, but she does so for British and Free French, and for Poles and Norwegians and Senegalese and Sudanese, whatever nationality the troop might be, as long as they're fighting the Nazi cause. And another thing that's stand out about her, very quickly after the torch landings, the locals in Morocco and other North African countries are somewhat shocked, to put it mildly, that the American military is segregated, that there are white units of soldiers and black units of soldiers, and apparently never the twain should meet. And Josephine puts on these shows for black and white GIs, and she says to them after the show, look, we need to win the battle on racial segregation, because what are we fighting for against the Nazis if we've got the same issues on a lesser scale, but the same issues going on with our own military? But let's concentrate on what we need to do first, and that is to defeat Hitler and to vanquish Nazism. Let's concentrate on that first, and once the war is won, then we can embrace the second battle. So she had this unbreakable, unyielding focus, and no matter what happened, no matter how things changed in the war, she was resolute to the last. And just one final demonstration of that, because it's the coup de grace. So right at the end of the war, victory's been declared. She's in Berlin performing at the very highest level to all the top generals. And then a request goes out for a performer to go to Buchenwald, the concentration camp, because there are, thousands of typhoid victims and others who are dying in the camp, and no one will go. So Josephine steps forward. Bear in mind, she's been very ill. So she's the last person you could argue should go there. And she goes and she sings for the dead and dying of Buchenwald after the war has ended. She had, again, she could have said no. She could have not stepped forward. But in keeping with her spirit throughout the war, she went that extra mile. She went above and beyond. And, that's really the standout message of the whole story. The whole book is that here you have someone who, at any number of times, right from the word go, could have just walked away, could have taken the easy road, the road well traveled. She didn't do that. Not at any stage, did she?
Wow. And that will kind of be the final way we end this, because, we've talked about your other books. You're prolific, as some of my other guests are, but this book has that potential to kind of crossover success. The John McKay has been watching tonight. He's a big fan of yours. He's read it. Darren Little, people like that. It will appeal to the usual, I want to read an exciting World War II story, but it's also got that aspirational kind of almost self-help look of here's what someone can do who starts in adversity and has some pretty shitty things happen to her during her life, but yet never gives up, has this resolve. And then, we haven't even touched on the post-war activism and the adoption of children and all the other things she does there. Another 30 years of brilliance and overcoming financial difficulties and more marriage failures and more health issues and things like that. And then, as we started off, rising to the fact that after 40 years after her death, there she is recognized, one of only 6 women in the Pantheon, only 81 people since 1791. So France loves her as much as she loved France, which I think is a wonderful way to kind of end it. And so
fantastic.
This clearly is it will have this crossover appeal. It will be a book that makes people feel good about themselves and aspirational, I guess.
Do you know, and there's another point as well, just briefly, that look, we can't not mention what's going on in Europe, the war in Ukraine. Okay, we need to stand up to despots. We need to understand freedom has to be fought for every day. Okay, something we've forgotten. We need to understand it. We need to just grasp the nettle, guys. We need to fight for our freedom because it's under threat. And if there's one story from the Second World War that demonstrates that most powerfully, it's this one. This is someone who gave everything to fight for freedom's cause, who realized that the darkness was coming and we needed to stand. And no matter how dark it looked and hopeless and pointless and utterly impossible odds, you had to stand and fight. So it's a story of our time, I believe, and it's great it's an honor to have been able to have written it, in this day and age.
Absolutely. And stand up and be counted, because most of us go through life needing to be inspired by we're sheep to some extent. We need that one person to stand up and say, do this. And she clearly was one of those people, and other people you've written about in your career are those standout people that just make that difference. And it's just, it's just so wonderful on a personal level because of her background. When we've barely touched on the fact she's Black, we've barely touched on the fact she's female. As really, it's who she is. It's just the fact she's a defiant spirit. But those two elements, we mustn't forget what other layers of difficulty that gave her during this whole thing, and even her sexuality, even her marriage. There's so many complex levels to this. But yeah, what an inspirational figure. So, tell us about you. You've got a book event at Malvern tomorrow, isn't it? Tomorrow,
Yeah. So tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday evening at Malvern College, I'm giving a talk on the book. It's for charity. It's for the Malvern Radar Trust, which I've been a long supporter of, World War II charity. There are still some tickets available. Please do try and come along. I'm really looking forward to being back there. I've talked there before. It's a lovely venue. Malvern is a wonderful town to visit. So hope to see as many of you there who can make it. It's the first time I'll be speaking in person about Josephine's story. And it's going to be fantastic, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I hope that will lead to other things. And again, not just speaking to the kind of the crusty war buffs, speaking to women's groups or whatever it would be, because her story, as I said, has this incredible universal appeal, international appeal of rising above so many things. I mean, I'm becoming a bit of a fanboy, or just during the show there. I mean, as I said, because of all that press in France last year, it came back into my mind there, Magali, when I said, "Oh, Damien's coming on to talk about Joseph." He said, "Oh, brilliant," she said, and she's watching this show. She doesn't watch all my shows because she's not obsessed about World War II as I am. I'm watching this one, and that's great. So
that's fantastic
for this high, and you're welcome back anytime, and I can't wait to get to grips with whatever you're working on right now. So
thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for joining us, Damien. I'll just drop you off screen. I'll bring you back in a second. So, folks, I'm doing nothing this weekend. Then Monday, I'm going to mix up with shows. Peter Hart, the amazing, colourful Peter Hart, is joining us to talk about his new book, Burning Steel, about the Fife and Forfar Yeomanry in Normandy. Peter Hart, you may know, was the amazing archivist at the Imperial War Museum, taking all those oral histories of First World War and Second World War people, and massively eccentric. If you heard any of his podcasts, he's nutty as a squirrel poo, I say, but fantastic. So I can't wait to have Peter Hart on. Then there'll be some sporadic outpouring of shows during the D-Day commemoration period. I'll try and bring some stuff to you, but the theme weeks will start again kind of in the middle of June. But anyway, I'm going to bring Damien back in just to say thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your talks. I hope if you're anywhere near Malvern, you can go into. I've been to Malvern. It's a lovely town, isn't it? Yeah.
It's lovely, yeah.
So people go out and support you. And generally, folks, we are getting out of this COVID nightmare now. So people like Damien and my other guests, when they are going out and speaking at things, we've enjoyed having all these virtual experiences, but folks, there's nothing like going out there and sitting in an audience and being able to speak to someone and have them speak to you direct there. So as we move forward, be brave and get out there and start being social again. I'm enjoying it now, going to the pub and meeting historians. It's fantastic. So there we are. So have a great weekend, Damien. And everyone, thanks for watching. This is Paul Woodedge for World War II TV saying we'll see you all after the weekend. Cheers, everybody. Bye.